Well, joining us now to talk about why we should reject net zero and embrace energy freedom is author of Fossil Future: Why Global Human Flourishing Requires More Oil, Coal and Natural Gas, Not Less. Alex Epstein. Alex, it's always great to see you. You've had a terrific, Twitter thread the other day in which you basically explain how net zero by 2050 would be, in your words, apocalyptically destructive if fully implemented. So tell us why you think that's the case, Alex.
Well, I think one thing about these net zero policies is this is not an exciting, new, untested idea. This has been a dominant idea for years, and the world has been moving in this direction. And we can just see that by moving very, very mildly in this direction. So keep in mind, we haven't even moved toward net zero. We've just slowed the growth of fossil fuels and therefore emissions. By slowing the growth, we've still created a global energy crisis. So the net zero movement is saying we should have done far more already, which means we would have way greater shortages. And then they want to basically eliminate fossil fuels in the next 27 years. And this just ignores the reality that fossil fuels are the only globally cost-effective source of energy for the foreseeable future in a world that needs far more energy. And because energy is the basis of modern life, starving people of that turns everyone into a third world place.
James.
But Alex, the thing I have to wonder every time, I look at this issue, I think about, I read your stuff and other people, and I wonder if for the people who are really pushing this, whether or not this idea of impoverishing people, about destroying an independent, prosperous middle class, is actually, for some of them, more of a feature than it is a bug, and that there's actually the idea here is to make people more dependent and reduce their prosperity, because that, in some people's mind, vast, widespread middle-class prosperity has caused, all sorts of evils in the world, and they would like to see people with their lives more constricted, constrained, going forward. I think about what this case was in England, where somebody wants a 15-minute city where everybody has to live in their own little 15-minute zone. Is this where we're going?
I think it's definitely a motive for the leadership. I talk about this a lot in chapter 3 of Fossil Future, where I try to get at why are our leaders ignoring these huge benefits of fossil fuels? Yep. Mm-hmm. And also having a tendency to what I call catastrophize all the side effects. Why are they doing this in a world that needs much more energy, when this is going to clearly deprive billions of people of the energy they need to be productive and prosperous, or to have that opportunity? And I think for the leaders, not for people who are ignorant of the facts, but for the leaders, I think you're really getting at it. There is a hostility toward prosperity. And what I link it to is, if you look at the core of the green movement, green really means minimize or eliminate human impact. There's this idea that our impact on Earth is immoral and also inevitably self-destructive. And if you believe our impact is moral, that means industry and prosperity are immoral. The least impacting humans are the poorest humans. So it is, if you just take it literally, which I like to take ideas literally, green means poverty.
Rita.
No, that is a very good line. Green means poverty. And we're seeing
I just made it up.
It's great. That's great, Alex.
Well, we're seeing in Europe now that come to fruition. We're going to have millions of people, and already have had millions of people, plunged into energy poverty because they're further down this net zero road than we are here in Australia. Tell us about that, about the human suffering that's going to cause, even in the first world, never mind depriving the developing world of the energy they need.
I think Europe is really important to focus on, because as you're talking about, it's the first world. It's got industry. It has, a certain amount of freedom in it. This is seen as the wealthy world. I mean, this is a place people want to visit in part for the wealth. And now they are afraid of winter like it's Game of Thrones. You just think about how embarrassing that is for a modern society to be afraid of the cold. I mean, even 100 years ago, it was pretty embarrassing in the modern world to be afraid of cold. But in an era where we know how to make energy with, coal, oil, gas, nuclear, hydro, and we're restricting our ability to do all 5 of those things to the point where we've just handicapped ourselves. It's not like we forgot how to make energy or create heat. It's that we're literally not allowed to because the green movement thinks it's wrong to. That's really the core of it.
And Alex, I'm going to play you a clip here by our energy minister. He's also, of course, our climate change minister. He's also a stand-up comedian. Every time he gets into Parliament, he certainly makes me laugh. This clown, and I'm happy to call him that, Chris Bowen, has come out and said there's one form of energy which Vladimir Putin cannot disrupt. So this is this whole idea that all the problems, as you point out, Alex, which have been created by a decade or 2 decades of green-style environmental policies, no, they're not to blame for the energy problems. It's all evil Vladimir Putin. Now have a listen to this character.
Because renewables is the cheapest form of energy, and there's one form of energy which Vladimir Putin cannot disrupt. That's the flow of sun to our landmass and the flow of wind on and off our shores. And increasingly, that will play a bigger role in our energy grid. It's cheaper and also not subject to the international geopolitical crises that coal and gas have been.
Oh, God.
So, Alex, I'll just let you run with this. This is what we have to put up with in Australia. You think you got it bad politically in America. We've got people like this running the show. What are your thoughts, Alex?
Well, when I heard the beginning of that, I thought, well, I hope this guy's not in a position of authority. That would be really, really bad. I mean, it's funny. He says Vladimir Putin can't disrupt sun rays and wind gusts. Well, I have news for this guy. Those have been around a long time. Those don't mean that you have energy. To have energy, you actually have to convert a raw fuel into energy. And to do that with solar and wind, you need all of these materials made in a place called China. Yes. And you may not know, but China is not the friendliest place to the free world. And they dominate the supply of solar and wind much more than anyone dominates fossil fuels, let alone Russia. So if you want to be dependent on hostile dictators with global ambitions, use solar and wind, assuming they even worked, which they don't. They don't produce reliable electricity, let alone the other uses of energy. So that's the main thing. But even if they did, we would have huge security concerns because they are China-centered forms of energy right now.
But I mean, Alex, also, the other thing with this too, you want to make solar panels. Well, there's a controversy in Australia right now where we're sending hundreds of thousands, millions of tons of silica to China to make these solar panels. They're incredibly environmentally destructive, the process of mining all the lithium and all these other things for the batteries and the transmission grid, which has to be, triple plated to work with all of this stuff. Incredibly environmentally impactful, incredibly, human rights destructive. Why does the left just simply ignore all of that?
Well, I think all of these things can be done in a responsible way. But if you look at what the left, or we can call the green movement specifically, what they've done is they've had this hostility toward impact in industry. And so that doesn't mean we don't use industry. It means we use industry from other places, often that have very low safety standards and human rights standards. So that's what happens. The other thing is the green movement has only supported one form of energy in its history, and that is imaginary energy. They always pretend to support things that don't work, but then oppose them when they do. So they pretended to support nuclear, they pretended to support natural gas, right? Then they call it fracking. So it's fundamentally an anti-impact, anti-industry, anti-energy movement. So green energy is a contradiction in terms. Energy means have a lot of impact. Green means anti-impact. They just focus on these things that will win people over to opposing the form of energy they're focused on, but really they're hostile to all energy. That's what really explains what's going on.
Something else Chris Bowen said there was about renewables, the wind and the sun being the cheapest form of energy. Now, how truthful is that statement?
Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned, so there's something, I don't have a less technical way of putting this, but I call it the energy fungibility fallacy, which is the idea that all forms of energy are the same. And so first of all, electricity is not the same as every other form of energy. Electricity is about 1/5 of the world's energy. We use a lot of burning of things for industrial heat. And then for heavy duty transportation, we can't use electricity. So that's one thing. And then also you can't equate reliable electricity and unreliable electricity. So all these claims of being cheap just focus on electricity, and then they ignore all the costs necessary to use solar and wind in a reliable way, which basically means a grid that backs them up 100%. Because if you don't back them up 100%, they can go near zero. So the full cost of solar and wind includes all the backup infrastructure. And so, I mean, this guy's a clown, so he wouldn't think of this. But even the kind of more well-meaning people are confused. It's called partial cost accounting. You only look at the cost of the panels, but you don't look at the cost of the whole infrastructure to generate reliable electricity.
And just quickly before we go, Alex, I want to ask you, we're now in this ludicrous position. You know how resource-rich Australia is. We've got the lot. We've got, we could be the great nuclear power. We've got all the uranium we need and the world needs, gas, oil, etc. We are in the point where we're putting a price cap, like a communist-era style price cap on coal, and then handing rebates to consumers. This is what our federal government is now going to be doing in the coming months. What does putting a price cap on coal and then handing cash to consumers to pay the extra cost of that, what does that do in energy terms?
It's like an Econ 101 recipe for shortages. I mean, if you want to look at a bad example, look at the U.S. and specifically Richard Nixon in the 70s, right? We had bad policies that restricted the supply of fossil fuels. And instead of addressing those policies, they tried to pass price controls to avoid the fact that they had artificially restricted the supply. So when prices go up, you need to liberate the supply. You can't put your head in the sand and say, no, I'm going to cancel all that by making prices artificially low. Then you don't suppress demand. And so then demand outstrips supply. And then you have real shortages like we had with gas lines in the 1970s. So this is just, it's obvious. We've artificially restricted the supply. Let's liberate the supply. And these guys need to own up to their mistakes and stop denying them.
Alex Epstein, there's a job going here for Energy Minister. I was hoping you might apply, and then we can get Chris Bowen back onto the comedy circuit where he belongs. Alex, always great to chat to you.
I'll be a free advisor.
Thank you so much. Advisor. And of course, your book, Fossil Future, must read. Alex Epstein, great to have you on again, as always.